We begin today's shir at the Mishnah that you'll find 12 lines from the top of Daf Nun Tes. Kohen Gadol lo yiso almona. This is a topic that we've been touching on in the last few dapim numerous times. A Kohen Gadol is prohibited by the Torah from marrying a widow. Bein almona mino erusin, bein almona mina nisuen. No distinction between her being an almona, a widow from her first husband who had not actually consummated their marriage. They reached only the erusin stage. That's the stage at which a man gives money or money equivalent to a woman in anticipation of marrying her. That establishes erusin. Or, of course, if she is an almona from having been fully married, reaching the nisuin stage of marriage. V'lo yiso es haboigeres. A Kohen Gadol, according to the Tanakama, is proscribed from marrying a girl over the age of 12 and a half. Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon, machshirin beboigeres. These two Tanoim, Rebbe Elazar and Rebbe Shimon, say that a bogeres is not unfit for a Kohen Gadol. The Torah insists that a Kohen Gadol marries a Basula, a virgin, and cannot marry a widow, and certainly cannot marry a divorcee nor a chalutza. Those last two are prohibited even to a standard Kohen, a Kohen Hedyot. V'lo yiso es mukas eitz. The literal translation is, he shall not marry a woman who was struck by wood. And when we speak about struck by wood, we're talking about some type of impact in the woman's feminine area, the organs of femininity, and that would ruin the besulim, the membrane that serves to seal, we'll say, the orifice of reproduction. And hence the Mishnah makes reference to the Kohen Gadol not marrying such a woman, a mukas eitz. As far as what the sources for these points are, this is featured later in the Gemara. Before we continue in the Gemara itself, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading, the Nosei, which reads, Kohen Gadol asur gam be'almona min ha'erusin v'lo rak min ha'nesuin. A Kohen Gadol is restricted from marrying a widow, even if it's a widow only from the early stage. In other words, it might still be a virgin because she never consummated her marriage with the first husband. Nevertheless, the Torah prohibits, in our Gemara we see this, that the Kohen Gadol, the Mishnah indicates that the Kohen Gadol cannot marry a widow, even of that nature. Tonu Rabbanan, Almona lo yikach. The pasuk says that he shall not marry an almona, a widow. Bein almona min ha'erusin, bein almona min ha'nesuin. Just like we saw in the Mishnah, whether she's an almona from merely having reached the erusin stage, or even if she consummated her marriage. The Gemara asks, Pshita, that's obvious. Does the source have to spell that out? When you see the word almona, almona means a widow. It indicates an almona from whatever stage. So the Gemara answers why this had to be spelled out. Mahu detema leiluf almona mitomar. The word almona appears in the Torah in Sefer Breshis, in the pasuk where it says Shvi almona. Tomar was the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, and Tamar's husbands, Er and Oinon, they had died, and in that context she is described as Shvi almona, sit or wait as an almona. Now in her case she had consummated her marriage. Ma lahalon min hanisuin, just like there by Tamar, it means she was, as the historical facts are, she was an almona from nisuin and not from erusin. Afkan, so too with regard to the Kohen Gadol, min hanisuin, I would think that it's an almona only from nisuin, because there's precedent in the Torah for that. Chomash Malon, that's why the Tanaic source has to spell out that when dealing with the Kohen Gadol, Almona includes the prohibition of an Almona Min Erusin as well. Maybe let's press the case and say it means only Almona Min Nisuin. So the Gemara answers Dumya de Grusha. The Torah teaches, along with the prohibition of marrying an Almona, the prohibition of marrying a Grusha. Ma Grusha Bein Min Nisuin, just like the word Grusha obviously means divorced from whatever stage, even the early stage, even from the Erusin stage, and there is no precedent for understanding Grusha some other way. Hence, the matter of Grusha is Pashit. So just like Grusha is obvious, inclusive of both stages, Af Almona that appears in the same pasuk, the Almona is a reference to both stages. Bein Min Erusin, Bein Min HaNesuin. V'lo Yisa es habogeres Tanu Rabbanan. Before we continue, we have on the side the nosei, the topic heading Machlokes Tanoim im bogeres kshera l'kohen gadol. Is a bogeres girl that has not been in intimacy with any man? She's still uninitiated, if you want to use that expression, but she has reached the age of 12 and a half. Is she acceptable as a wife for a kohen gadol? V'hu isha b'v'suleha yikach prat l'bogeres, to the exclusion of a bogeres, shekolu la b'suleha divrei Rebbe Meir. The word kolu, maybe you're familiar with the word vayechulu hashamayim v'aretz. Kolu is to complete or end, finish off. Her besulim, that's the membrane found within the orifice or the canal of the female's reproductive area. It is no longer there. As a girl gets older, so the aperture gets wider, and the skin that constitutes that particular membrane that's referred to in halacha by the term besulim, it contracts or recedes. So a bogeres is, according to Rebbe Meir, excluded by the word of the Torah, bivisuleha. The pasuk once again said, "V'hu isha bivisuleha yikach." The kohen gadol is instructed to marry a girl bivisuleha. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon machshirin bebogeres. They say that she is acceptable. Well, b'mai komifligi. What is the basis of their controversy? Rabbi Meir savar. So what we will see in the next few lines is common to many drushes in the Torah. When a word in the Torah appears beyond its, we'll say, its root form, where there is a basic word and then there are letters, prefixes, suffixes in letter form, prefix letters, suffix letters that appear attached to the word. And that's what we have in this case, so that we focus on the root word and then we attempt to reveal what do the added parts of the word come to teach us. So Rabbi Meir Savar, Besula, the word Besula, which we'll call that the root word, implies afilu mixas Besula mashma. Even if she's not a completely, we'll call it, if I hope everyone understands the word sealed, because we're referring to the membrane that seals the aperture that upon the first act of intimacy, so it is broken by the male insertion. So the word basula, as far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, indicates a woman is acceptable even if it's not all there. There's just part is there, which that would be the case of a girl who's 12 and a half, that just part is there. But anyway, he says even mixas basulim is included. However, but that's not the word. It says the word is bivisuleha. So we go to expanding the word bisuleha. That is ad deiko kol absulim. That implies that we're not going to qualify a girl if she is only mixas basulim. It has to be completely present. Bivisuleha. This Rabbi Meir learns she becomes disqualified as a result of intimacy b'kedarka in shelo kedarka lo, If a girl had experienced intimacy with a man, however, the male insertion was not through the aperture, the canal of reproduction, but rather through the other bodily aperture that exists. We'll call it the posterior aperture, if you will. That's shaloi kedarka. If the girl experienced intimacy with a man in that fashion, she is still qualified to marry a Kohen Gadol. We have a little chart, by the way, on the side of the Gemara page. We call it Tavla, with Machlokes Rabbi Meir on the one hand versus Rabbi Elazar Shimon on the other hand. Across the top you see the expansion of the word Besula, Besuleha, Bivisuleha. Down the side you see Rabbi Meir on the one hand, and then under that you have the other two of the other rabbis that constitute the alternative opinion. So let's review with the chart what we've seen so far. Rabbi Meir under Besula, what does that mean to him? It means that if the Torah had written just Besula, we would have allowed a Bogeres. However, the Torah doesn't write Besula. The word Besulea appears, so that answers the Bogeres, and hence we saw the source above where Rabbi Meir prohibits the Kohen Gadol from marrying a Bogeres. What does the added Beis Bivisulea accomplish for Rabbi Meir? It accomplishes that a girl who experienced intimacy in the Shalo Kedarka fashion is okay. So structurally, you see a flow, we'll call it an alternating action with regard to this word. You see Rabbi Meir starting off with inclusion or heter, machshir, the next stage restriction, and the next stage heter. Now, we continue in the Gemara. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Safri, Besula, the word Besula, if it had appeared in its basic form, Besula Shlema Mashma, they have the opposite starting point from Rabbi Meir. There, Besula would have, according to them, Besula would have implied, would have taught complete Besulim present. Besuleha, Vafilu, Mixas Besulim. The fact the word appears as Besuleha teaches me that even if part of the Besulim are there, in other words, she's become a Bogeres, she's kosher. Bivisuleha, so now the next stage of drasha would have to be restrictive, because just before this we saw leniency or inclusiveness. Now the next stage is a reaction to that, restrictiveness. And what does this restrict? B'vsuleh, Achu kol b'suleh kayomin bein b'kedarka bein shelo kedarka. Now that means that she will be excluded from eligibility for Kohen Gadol, not only if her intimacy was b'kedarka, but even if it was through the shelo kedarka form of intimacy. As you can see, we have a slash mark indicating the end of that particular trend of thought, and the chart is still available to all of you to see, to review the shittas and see what each one did. But for our purposes, the main point of difference was that according to Rabbi Meir, Besulea was the basis of excluding a Bogeres, and according to Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon, the word Besulea was the basis of including a Bogeres. For the Kohen Gadol, of course. On the side, we have a Nosei topic heading, Dinoi Shel Rav. Rav's teaching, Nivalo Shelo Kedarka, Psulo L'Kohen Gadol, Mishum Berula. A woman who experienced this Shelo Kedarka form of intimacy, Rav tells us she becomes disqualified from marriage to Kohen Gadol on the grounds of her being a Be'ula. Be'ula is a term associated with the act of intimacy. So what Rav is saying is that the term Be'ula is expanded to include intimacy even in the Shelo Kedarka fashion. The Gemara, Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Rav, Nivalo Shelo Kedarka Psula Lekahuna. a woman who experienced intimacy in the Shelo Kedarka fashion is rendered unfit to a Kohen Gadol on the grounds of being classified a Be'ula. Bula often is a term that stands in contrast to the term Besula. Mosiv Rava, a question is raised, and you'll notice it's a long question. The pasuk that's cited in this Tanaic source is from the context of a man who rapes a Na'ara, that is a Besula. Na'ara is a girl between 12 and 12 and a half, and she is a Besula. She's still a virgin. The Torah expects that a man who does that he shall marry her. Let us say a man happened to choose a girl to rape, but halachically it's a type of girl that he's not allowed to marry. So what you have here is you have two forces. On the one hand, the Torah insists that upon the act of rape, the man, the rapist, shall marry the victim, of course, if she approves. In contrast, though, we have a situation where the girl that was raped is a girl that's not fit under other circumstances for the man to have offered marriage to her. So the pasuk says, well, first we read Mosiv Rava. Velo means unto him, unto the rapist, Tiel Isha, she shall be a wife. Be'isha haru'uya lo, that halacha of the rapist being expected to marry the girl is only if she is fit for him, to the exclusion of almona l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot. If a kohen gadol happened to rape an almona, and we're going to emphasize she's an almona from the stage of erusin. Otherwise, if erusin is indicative of a woman that did not experience intimacy, so she had been betrothed by a man who died before they consummated their marriage, and this Kohen Gadol, he raped her. Grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedyot, or a standard Kohen, a common Kohen, had raped a divorcee or a chalutza. The pasuk v'lo tiel isha, with this pasuk I now know that the din of the ma'anes, of the rapist having to marry her, will not include almona l'kohen gadol. Heifi dami. The Kohen Gadol raped her. How did he rape her? Here we're getting into what we'll call vivid detail. If he raped her by intimacy in the kedarka fashion, through the orifice of reproduction, my irya mishum almona. If the pasuk is describing that case where he had raped her b'kedarka, why describe her as being excluded on the grounds of her being an almona? Tepukle mishum dahavya la be'ula. She's excluded on the grounds of his having made her a bula, namely a non-besula. Regardless of whether she was married to someone else or not, she's simply not fit to the Kohen Gadol. After he raped her, he can't marry her, because at this point she is a beula, a non-besula. And yet the source doesn't exclude her on those grounds. The source excludes her on the grounds that she is an almona. Elolav sheloi kedarka. Rather, the source is describing the following: a Kohen Gadol had raped an almona min erusin, by having relations with her in the shelo kedarka fashion. So, and what is her deficiency as described by the source? Mishum almona in mishum be'ula lo. She's described only as an almona. She's not described as a be'ula. Therefore, we are to come to the conclusion, according to this question, that intimacy in a shelo kedarka fashion does not result in her being a be'ula. Therefore, if a girl was never married, and all that she happened to experience was intimacy with some gentleman in a shelo kedarka fashion, she still has all the qualifications suitable for a kohen gadol. Therefore, why does Rav Yehuda Marav say nivala shelo kedarka makes her psula? She makes her a be'ula. It doesn't. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. Ha money. The statement that shelo kedarka is mutter to a kohen, in effect, the conclusion that we just reached from this question, based on the Tanaic source of Lo Tiheh L'Isha, this source, the source of Lo Tiheh L'Isha, is Rebbe Meir He. This is in accordance with Rebbe Meir, and he is the one. If you want to look back at your chart at the back, the lower part of Omid Aleph, you can see he was matir to a kohen gadol, someone who was nivala shelo kedarka. The Rav, who was quoted by Rav Yehuda, the Rav, the Omar Rebbe Elazar, he learns like the other Tanaic school of thought, Rebbe Elazar, who says that bia shelo kedarka does disqualify her from the kohen gadol. Question: Rabbi Elazar, if the source is in accordance with him, my irya mishum be'ula. Why, if that is not, I should have said more accurate, not the source, but rather if Rav is based on Rebbe Elazar, why does he disqualify the girl on the basis of her being a be'ula? Tepuk lei dehavyola zoina. She is classified as a zona. In the Torah speaks about different kinds of women as being prohibited to kohanim: a grusha, a chalutza, a halala, and a zoina. Rebbe Elazar is a Tana upon whom Rav is basing himself, but that Tana Rebbe Elazar says, Da'am Rebbe Elazar, Ponui habo ala pnuya shaloi l'shem ishus asa zoina. That even two unmarried, two single people that have a fling, as we may say in common jargon, an act of intimacy that is not for the purpose of marriage, that establishes the girl as being a zoina, and that is enough reason for her being pasol lekahuna. Why then does Rav make his point that nivala shelo kedarka makes her into a be'ula, a non-besula? Nivala shelo kedarka, according to Rav, if he is based on the Tana Rebbe Elazar, makes her into a zoina. Now, as we go on in the Gemara, we have a new geometric form, a diamond, and on the side, under the nosei mivneh heading, the diamonds introduced rochim lahasbir. These are ways to explain be'ezin nesibois nitan livsoil isha l'kohen gadol shenivala shelo kedarka. How is it that we can disqualify a woman from being eligible for a kohen gadol when she was participant in intimacy shelo kedarka mishum be'ula, on the grounds of her being a bula, v'lo mishum zoina aliba de Rebbe Elazar? According to Rebbe Elazar, Damar Panui Haba Al Panuya Asa Zaina. So how can we have our cake and eat it too? Have Rav work in accordance with Rebbe Elazar, and yet the girl after Bia Shelo Kedarka is not called a Zaina and called only a Be'ula? Omar Rav Yosef Kagoin Shenivala Lebehema Tahasa Mishum Be'ula Ika Mishum Zoina Leka. Rav said a halach. He said Nivala Shelo Kedarka makes her a Be'ula. So what happened? She was Nivala, but an animal had relation. Some male animal had we'll call it a male organ insertion to the woman in the Shelo Kedarka fashion. That makes her into a Be'ula, but it does not classify her as a Zona, because the concept or the legal category of Zona is inapplicable to animals. Don't make any mistake about it. Relations with an animal, if it's done knowingly and willingly, it is punishable by court execution in the most serious fashion, namely through skila. That may be true. However, the legal category of her being called a zoina does not apply, because ein znus lebehema. Question. Omar le Abaye. Abaye asks Rav Yosef. Notice it's a long question. Mi manavshach. Either way, I be'ula havya, if she is a be'ula, zona nami havya, she is also to be called a zona, and hence disqualified from kahuna. The zona lo havya, if she is not made into a zona, be'ula nami lo havya, then it's not fair, so to speak. It's not accurate to call her a be'ula. The chitema, you might say that we can actually split these two concepts. Midi dahavya amukas eitz shelo kedarka. A woman who receives, we'll say this will impact in that part of her anatomy through not an organ of gender, but rather through some other blunt, hard substance, like a piece of wood. What happens then? She would be considered a be'ula, but not considered a zoina. So, is that what you want to say? Is that what you want to say that Rav is talking about? That the bia with a behema would be tantamount to mukas e shelo kedarka? Well, im kain, if mukas e shelo kedarka would render a woman unfit, ein l'cha isha shiksheru lekahuna shelo nasis mukas eitz ayadei tzror. Tzror is a stone. Just a word of background in hygienic terms, in the context of one's relieving himself in the bathroom. After relieving oneself from solid waste, so in the toilet paper era, there was the use of shaped, smooth stones. So in simple, daily, natural behavior, you've got pressure applied to the shelo kedarka orifice after leaving the facilities. So every woman would be disqualified. There'd be no women fit to Kehanim Gedolim. So you can't create a category of mukaseit shelo kedarka whereby we would say, okay, she's not a zona, but she is a be'ula. That would disqualify all women from Kahuna Gedola. So we're still pressed to explain Shitas Rav, who said Nivala Shelo Kedarka creates a Be'ula and not a Zona. Ela Omar Rabbi Zera Be Mima Enes. We take a look at the Rashi. Ela Omar Rabbi Zera, you see across from here. Mishkachas lo lahad Rav aliba de Rabbi Lazar. We can set up Rav in accordance with the Tana Rabbi Lazar. Dahav Yabula v'lo Zoina v'lo Almana v'lo Grusha. That her only disqualification is the fact that she is a Be'ula and not anything else. And where is that? Biktana Yisoima Hanises Lebal Uboala Shelo Kedarka Umianabo. The term Mima'enes is associated with a girl who is a minor, who was married on a rabbinic level by her brother or mother to some man. That's a rabbinic marriage where a mother or brother give her over to some man. Or let us just assume that her father is dead and she is survived by brothers and a mother, and her mother gives her over to some man in marriage. That marriage has a rabbinic status until she reaches adulthood, until she goes past 12 years of age. Prior to that, the halacha says that before she reaches gadlus, she has the right, before she reaches adulthood, she can say, I don't want to continue with this man, and just walks right out. Before she did that, she had been married rabbinically to a man who had intimacy with her, but only shaloi kedarka. Afterwards, she was mima'enes. So how do we classify her? There is no psul of znus. Her intimacy with him was totally licensed, so we can't call her a zona. We can't call her almona, no one's dying. There's no grusha, because her departure from him is not through a divorce document. Rav is telling us that such a girl, nevertheless, is disqualified from Kohen Gadol on the grounds of being called a be'ula. As you see, a slash mark that indicates a new trend of thought that follows. And we glance at the side where we have a nosei, a topic heading, which reads, number 1, Nivala lebehema kshera lekahuna, a woman who experienced intimacy with an animal. A male animal had inserted its male organ into the female human being. She is considered kshera lekahuna. Aleph, kedarka, if the relation, the intimacy was through the woman's normal orifice of intimacy, then dino kemukas eitz. She's classified as that, having experienced impact. Shelo kedarka. Now, by the way, we're saying she's still kosher lekuna. That means that she doesn't become a zona, as we said before. There's no ein znus lebehema, and it doesn't make her a be'ula, and that we see here by her being called a mukas eitz. Velo, and now shelo kedarka, and the Gemara will discuss bias behema shelo kedarka. Kemo b'maisa b'hislu, the Gemara will feature a story in the community of Hislu. Another point that will be emphasized by the Gemara is what we mentioned, ein znus labehema. The concept of znus is inapplicable to animal-person intimacy. The Gemara, Amar of Simi bar Chia, Nivala lebehema kshera lekahuna. A woman who experienced bia with an animal, she is acceptable even as a wife of a Kohen Gadol. She's considered a mukas eitz, a woman that simply experienced impact. And mukas eitz, we saw that is not a situation that creates a halachic category of be'ula. Tanya nami hachi nivalo lemisha eno ish, a woman who experienced intimacy with someone that's not a human being, namely an animal, afal pi shebeskilu, even though it's an act punishable by court execution, kshera lekahuna, she is still fit to marry a Kohen Gadol. It's like saying a woman who violated Shabbos. It's a terrible thing to violate Shabbos. It's punishable by court execution, but in the meantime, that doesn't render her unfit to marrying a Kohen Gadol. He also, Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came, he said, Maisa be'rivo achas. Rivo is a young girl, behislu, in the city of Hislu, shoisa mechabedes es habayis, she was sweeping the house, v'rava kelev kufri me'achoreha, and a dog had intimacy with her, jumped upon her from behind. That's shelo kedarka. V'chshira Rebbe Lukuna. Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. Rabbi Yehuda Nossi said she's fit to marry a Kohen Gadol. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, just historically, he lived approximately in the year 200 of the Common Era. we could say a good 130 years after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what's Rebbe saying over here? That this woman in Hislu, she can marry a Kohen Gadol. Omar Shmuel Kohen Gadol. Bimei Rebbe Kohen Gadol mihave. Shmuel points out that when Rebbe says she's Sherlakuna, it means she's fit to marry even a Kohen Gadol. So regarding that, the Gemara asks, Bimei Rebbe Kohen Gadol mihave. In the time of Rebbe, was there a Kohen Gadol? It was after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Elo ru'uya l'kohen Gadol. Rather, it means that if we were at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, she would be fit to marry a Kohen Gadol. Not that there is a Kohen Gadol right now. Omar le Rava mi Parzakya le Ravashi. Minoha milsa di Omer Rabbanon ein znus lebema. From where do we know the common law that intimacy between a woman and animal does not make her into a zoina? Ein znus lebehema. Dichtiv, the pasuk says, Lo savi esnan zoina umechir kelev. Just a word of background, this pasuk is describing animals that are fit to be brought as sacrifices. For example, sheep, goats, cows, animals of that nature. However, if they were used as either payment to a harlot for services rendered, or a sheep was used to purchase a dog, the sheep given in exchange for a dog, or the sheep, cow or goat, given to a harlot for her services rendered, don't bring that to the Beis Hamikdash as a sacrifice. Lo savi esnan zoynu mechir kelev. Utnan. And the Tanaic source comments that if you take these two expressions, esnan zona and mechir kelev, and you switch them around, you interchange the terms. Esnan kelev umechir zoina mutaren. Let's see what do we mean by an esnan kelev. Rashi, the lower part of the Rashi commentary, esnan kelev shimamar adam lezoina. If a man approached a harlot and he said to her, Heilach tle zeh, take this sheep, v'boali lekalbi, and have intimacy with my dog. Apparently you have this man that wants to provide his dog with some type of immoral pleasure, so he pays a zoina to have intimacy with his dog. That's esnan kelev. So what's happening here? Payment is being made. A sheep is being paid to a harlot. For what purpose? For an act of harlot girl, woman, human being with dog. The sheep paid to her can be brought as a sacrifice in the Beis Hamikdash. It's not the same thing as a sheep paid to a harlot for services with yourself or with another human being. That is an esnan zona that the pasuk prohibited as a sacrifice. However, sheep given to the same woman, the zona, but for intimacy with an animal, that's not called as an esnan zona. It's called esnan kelev, but the Torah doesn't prohibit that. The case of mechir zona is less relevant to us, but Rashi says mechir zona, shichlev zona betle. A person gave a sheep in exchange for receiving a harlot. In other words, he bought a harlot. Sounds like human trafficking. Mutar l'mizbeach. In other words, he's giving the sheep in exchange for the zona, not for services, just to acquire her. That sheep is mutar l'mizbeach u'mejishori esnan kelev almolav znusu. From the fact that the sheep given to the harlot in exchange for her services with a dog, and the sheep is allowed, so it's not called znus. Payment made to the zona for an act with a human being is prohibited, and that the Torah calls esnan zoina. Payment to the harlot for services with a dog is not called esnan zoina. Doesn't have the term, the classification of znus. So the source pointed out, Utnan, let's read the source again because we stopped prematurely. Utnan esnan kelev umechir zoina mutorin. Those are mutar shneimar. The pasuk says over there in the context of the esnan zona, it says gam shnehem shnayim velo arba, meaning there are two things that are prohibited, not four. The two are esnan zoina and mechir kelev, and not esnan. We're not esnan kelev and mechir zona as well. Tanu Rabbanan. Before we continue in the Gemara, we glance at the side where we have a topic heading: Anusas atzmoi, anusas chaveroi, im ovar v'nosa ma din havlad. As we've said already many times in today's shiur and previous shiurim, a kohen gadol is instructed by the Torah to marry a basula. If a woman experiences intimacy, certainly in the normal fashion, she's called a ba'ula. She becomes a ba'ula either through intimacy with another man or with the kohen gadol himself. If kohen gadol raped a girl and then he approaches her to marry her, at that point that he's approaching her in marriage, she's already a non-basula, and that's because and that's a result of the kohen gadol himself having rendered her thusly. That's anusas atzmo. Tonu Rabbanan, anusas atzmoi umefutas atzmoi lo yisa. A kohen gadol shall not marry the very woman that he himself either raped or seduced. V'imnasa nasui. If he married her, so the marriage takes hold. She becomes his wife. Anusas chavero umefutas chavero lo yisa. A kohen gadol shall not marry a woman raped by someone else or seduced by someone else. V'im nasa, and if he does marry her, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer havlad cholol, v'chachomim omrim havlad kosher. So we have a machloikis tanoim as to what is the status of the child of a kohen gadol who marries a woman who had been raped. This, by the way, is in stark contrast to a kohen who marries a grusha. Here we have the marriage between a kohen gadol and a woman that doesn't fulfill the basula requirements. So what happens, what's the status of a child whose mother didn't fulfill that requirement? If the mother happened to be a grusha, for example, so the kid is certainly a cholol. A cholol is a child of a kohen, father's a kohen, but the child has no kohen identity, no kohen status. He's called a cholol. Im nasa nasui. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, umotzi beget. We said in this source that if he he shouldn't marry her, but if he marries her, she is considered his wife, and umotzi beget. Rashi explains he is not allowed to stay with her. Motzi beget means he must divorce her. The Gemara asks, but it's the source indicated that if he marries her, it's considered a good marriage. It's considered a marriage. Where do you get this idea that he has to get rid of her with a get? Amar Avacha bar Yaakov Lomar. What the source meant when it said Im nasa nasui, it's not coming to say that they shall remain together, but rather it's telling me that he doesn't pay knas b'mefuteh. Rashi at the top she'ein mishalem knas b'mefuta, she'im mefutahi, if he had seduced her, ahanu lei nisuin, the marriage that he has with her is effective lemiftere miknosa, to exempt him from the Torah fine requirement, paying a fine for having seduced her. The Torah does mention a knas, a fine payment of 50 shekel, 50 pieces of silver. That is true. That's only if he doesn't marry her. Dichtiv im mo'ein yimo'ein. Avol im mohor yimorenu lo liisha lo yiten klum. However, the Rashi citing the pasuk and explaining, if he does take in marriage the woman that he seduced means she accepted, she went along with it, so there is no fine to be paid. Avol oines, a man who rapes a girl, not seduces but rapes a girl, noisein miyad, the Torah fine must be paid immediately. Afilu hu konsa, even if he eventually marries her. Dichtiv v'nosanu isha shochei v'ima. The pasuk says first, you shall pay the money. V'lo tiel ishan. Then it talks about his marrying her. The Gemara continues. Ozal Rav Gvia mi Beik Seal. Rav Gvia, that's his name, from Beik Seal, it's the name of a place. Omra l'shmaitzo kamei de Rav Ashi. He said in the presence of Rav Ashi that which Rav Huna said, umotzia beget. Omar lei. Rav Ashi reacts with a question. V'ho Rav Rabbi Yochanan de'ami travayu. Both Rav and Rabbi Yochanan say, boigeres umukas eitz lo yisa. A Kohen Gadol should not marry a bogeres, a girl over 12 and a half, nor a woman who experienced impact at that part of her body. V'im nasa nasui. And if he does marry her, she remains married to him. And the idea in this statement is, and he's ein motzia baget. What do we see from here, Alma? Soifa lios bogeres tachtov, soifa lios mukatz eitz tachtov. A girl who happened to be a bogeres or mukatz eitz, even though he shouldn't have married her, if he does, any girl anyway is going to become a bogeres while married to the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol, he marries a ketana. He marries a basula. She's going to lose the basulim anyway. She's going to become a bogeres anyway. So with that in mind, that is enough justification for a Kohen Gadol who married initially a bogeres or mukas eitz to remain together with her. Hochanami, so too regarding the scene, the din that Rav Huna had addressed. What did Rav Huna say? That a Kohen Gadol who had raped a woman, the marriage is a marriage, but he must get rid of her. Well, okay, but so what did he do? He had intimacy with her. Well, hochanami, sofalios bula tachtov. In a regular Kohen Gadol marriage with his wife, she's going to lose her basulim anyway. So based on this, we'll call it inevitability, just like in the case of the bogeres mukas eitz, that inevitability will arrive anyway. So even if that situation is present at the outset, she remains married. So too over here, soifilios bula tachtov. Rashi says, soifilios bula tachtov, v'im nasa nasui dekatani, and therefore the source that said if he does marry her, she is married, it means legamri kamar demuter lekaima, he can maintain her as his wife. Hayul uli atzmoi nivala, since we were describing a case where he himself had the intimacy, he had raped her. The Kohen Gadol himself had done it, V'sofa lios bu'ula loy, and eventually she will be bu'ula to him anyway as his wife had he married her at the outset. So, Kashya, this remains a difficulty for the din of Rav Huna in the name of Rav that insisted on her being divorced, that the Kohen Gadol should not maintain her as a wife.